We start with the impressive information, the images of the protests over there in Italy. Well, these are fireworks, and it's because, well, the protests against the Winter Olympic Games have been quite chaotic. The protesters have been launching not only fireworks, but they've also been trying to boycott. They claim that there is an impact on the environment as well as chaos in the economy, meaning excessive spending on many things that, according to them, are not really necessary. At least that's what these people who have been protesting say, and of course they've been clashing with the police. That's also part of what draws attention right now. Let's go to the news about what's happening around the world. Look, there's a situation that's drawing a lot of attention because they claim there was information about a phone call from a foreign intelligence agency. Careful with that, yes. She is the head of the National Security Agency, the one in charge of national security. Yes, the National Security Agency. The National Security Agency detected a completely unusual phone call. A foreign intelligence agency was communicating with someone very close to Donald Trump. This situation raised alarms and is already public. So obviously, either they leaked this because they suspect someone very close to Trump, or I even wonder, maybe Trump himself. Let's go over the information that is known, what has been leaked, the official information, and the suspicions that are coming up. We're live, so if you're watching live, please leave your comment. If you're watching the replay, thank you as well. I'm grateful for your support. Let's get to the details. The National Security Agency is one of the less discussed agencies. People often mention the FBI, CIA, and Pentagon, but not the National Security Agency. Tulsi Gabbard is also very well known. According to reports, the Director of National Intelligence of the United States had been blocking the distribution of the report about that call. So for some reason, do they want to block or censor that information, that detail? They claim that the President's Chief of Staff, Susie Wells, personally delivered a printed copy. Do you remember Susie Wells, the one in charge of managing Donald Trump's cabinet, who recently had a pretty controversial interview, right? The one where she compared Trump to a drunk person. Do you remember? And it was a metaphor, kind of referring to how drunk people say things very directly, but it was interesting the way she said it, and there were several curious details. But anyway, that's beside the point, right? What's going on? So, Gabbard would have told the National Security Agency not to release the report and to send all classified info only to her office. I mean, the National Security Agency, she oversees all intelligence, right? The National Security Agency reports to her and informs her about new information. Is there someone close to Trump who is receiving intelligence calls from another country? How does that work? Is there a leak at the highest level, or is there secret collaboration outside of official security and intelligence protocols? Who is leaking information? Are you sure they're reporting? This investigation has already been going on for a few months. On May 21st of last year, an official complaint was filed with the Inspector General, considering it to be a matter of urgent concern. The Inspector General's office dismissed the complaint after only 14 days, claiming it wasn't credible, although they allowed the whistleblower to take the case to Congress, but under certain conditions. The report was later blocked. This report is going to be unblocked this very month, February 2026. It has to be unblocked. Despite the laws that state that whistleblower reports must be sent to Congress within a maximum of 21 days, they forced the information not to reach Congress, not until many months later. Just imagine, it's May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February. All those months for this to be disclosed and brought to Congress, when it should have been, at most, 21 days. The independence of the Inspector General was questioned when Gabbard appointed one of his main advisors to the position, which should have required independence. Republicans like Tom Cotton have supported Gabbard, but others not so much. Even congressmen like Mark Warner accuse him of a deliberate attempt to bury a complaint that is extremely concerning. Who was involved and why? Did they get intelligence calls from other countries? Which country are we talking about? Russia, China. Who is making foreign intelligence calls to people close to Trump? The whistleblower is obviously worried, afraid that they might want to bury the information, and obviously he speaks through his lawyer. He claims that he is trying to speak directly with the congressional committees for an unclassified briefing about Gabbard's conduct and the content of the intercepted call. So this information, which has not yet been disclosed, is held by this person and his lawyer. And he is asking, well, for Congress to listen to what he has to say. Another scandal that adds to the series of problems that Donald Trump currently has, because of the Einstein issue and other matters. This is a matter of possible espionage at the highest level, and what would they be discussing there? What information would be shared? It will obviously be very interesting to watch. Meanwhile, yesterday I was also telling you and showing you this robot. Yesterday, Astrid and I showed it to you. This robot called Atlas, which is from Boston Dynamics. Atlas is a humanoid robot, but now there's a lot more information about this robot. Let's get into the details of some facts, of some points, maybe, well, this impressive, honestly, and above all, useful. No, because at the end of the day, up until now, robots tend to be very weak in what they can do, and they can really do very few things. It can lift 50 kilograms, operate autonomously for 4 hours, change its battery in 3 minutes, and recharge using 110 or 200 kilogram outlets. Volts. It has 56 degrees of joint freedom, a reach of 2.3 meters, and is water resistant. And it can withstand extreme temperatures from minus 20 degrees to around 40 degrees, meaning both cold and heat. It can keep working, obviously, for as long as it has battery, and when the battery is changed, it keeps working. Can you share? Let's suppose there's a group of workers in a company that's operating, and one of them learned how to do something more efficiently. Well, that information is automatically shared with all its fellow robots, so to speak, and it works like a network. So, everyone else will already know that the best way to lift a certain box to a certain place has to be done in a specific way. In other words, you don't have to reprogram them, they all automatically learn. It's as if it were, well, a kind of, let's say, unified thought, so to speak. Very strange. It's super interesting because of the uses this robot could have, and at the same time you see how it's evolving in a really fascinating and also, well, concerning way. On the other hand, right? According to reports, this is called collective network learning. Elatras can share the learning of new tasks in real time with its entire fleet. It uses a system called Orbit that integrates with manufacturing execution system platforms. Warehouse management system is also used for centralized manufacturing management. It can operate completely autonomously or be operated with a tablet, depending on the needs of each workflow. Well, there are multiple options. This has already been shown in these tech shops. Let's move on, as an interesting anomaly has been discovered. Let's discuss that. Subscribe. Make sure for me, that's good. The temperatures in the ocean are generating a series of anomalies on a global level, which Spain is experiencing right now with this storm it had, but this is going to start being seen in other parts of the world. According to reports, it is being detected that there is a warming of 2 to 3 degrees above normal, mainly in this area of the Atlantic. subscribe. This is already generating and fueling very intense storms this winter. That temperature difference, even though it may seem small when it comes to the ocean, is actually a lot. It generates more energy available for the formation of storms, increases the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, and intensifies rainfall in different parts of the planet. According to the reports, the excess heat is contributing to what they call a storm train, which is continuously arriving from the west of the peninsula, from over there in Spain, where they report that this tremendous storm occurred. The wind gusts have been concerning, even exceeding 80 kilometers per hour, as well as the excessive rainfall they've had in those regions. Several of you who live in Spain have already been telling us about this situation, and here we've shared some of the images of the waves and the flooding that you're experiencing and confirming. Well, this could be something we might see throughout the year in different parts of the planet. The excess heat in the Atlantic could bring a wave of storms and unusual hurricanes, let's say, bigger and stronger than in other years. It hasn't been done yet. The annual hurricane forecast hasn't come out yet, but it should be released sometime this month. The first one comes out at the end of February. And then, around May or June, another more advanced forecast comes out for the whole hurricane season. So let's see what they say, and if they take this information into account. Of course, I suppose they will, because in the end, that's what it's about. Analyzing the temperatures, how things are going, and then determining what the situation is. Meanwhile, another issue that draws attention is what's happening in Cuba. Right now, they're reporting 3.4 million people without electricity. There. Well, obviously it's a crisis that's happening and we've already been observing it here. Between what's happening in Cuba and what's happening right now, with the blackouts in Ukraine and Russia, well, obviously it's a huge issue. We won't go into too many details, but it was reported today that there was a partial collapse of the electrical system in Cuba. According to reports, Cuba's national electric system, the national electric system, suffered another partial collapse that affects about 3.4 million people. They say that, well, it comes and goes, right? The power goes out, then comes back. It's constantly causing problems. The company says the outages were caused by a high voltage line trip. Well, on Wednesday, there was a pretty serious blackout, which we mentioned here happened in Granma, Nolguin, Santiago de Cuba, and Guantanamo. I'm not so sure if they've already fixed that one, right? But the truth is that with the lack of power, it's also tough, isn't it? Or maybe it's not so much about fixing it, but rather that there's just not enough power for people there in Cuba. Well, that's how things are. Also, another topic that stands out is this series of movements where they show the use of drones, this time to attack an area where ammunition was being stored. There's the ammunition, they blow it up, and it was ammunition and weapons and so on that the Russians had hidden inside some tunnels, and they blow it up right there, right? That's also a huge topic. Other images that stand out today include this one. This image from Venezuela where protests are happening and they've overwhelmed the police, right? Because over there, the image by Gabriel Bastidas shows how these relatives of political prisoners managed to break through the police barrier. And that, well, obviously is also important, right? Another issue that also draws attention is what happened over in Russia, where another attack has been reported, this time on a power station in Belgorod. Yes, this attack that has been carried out with drones on the power station. It's a new policy that Ukraine has had for a few months now, or relatively new, where basically when their electric power is attacked in Ukraine, they respond by attacking power lines inside Russia. This would have caused a major blackout in Belgorod, and it's not the first one. They've been experiencing significant blackouts in that region all week. There have even been some reports of complaints from people there. Now here we're seeing, well, what can be seen? Let's listen. This is in Belgorod, according to reports from yesterday. Well, actually today at 8 o'clock local time, a missile alert was issued and it apparently hit and caused an explosion in the power supply area. It's not clear if it's a substation or something else, but they lost power throughout the center of Belgorod. At least a few hours later, the blackout was still ongoing. I don't know if the power has come back by now, but anyway, it's also an important part of what's been happening in that region of the world. Let's move on to other interesting matters as well. Another analysis of Spain notes its situation is interesting, as there are several explanations for what's happening, how the conditions for these storms and rains developed. One is the increased heat in the Atlantic, as I mentioned earlier, but there's another factor. Another situation that also draws attention is that before there was something here. Look, let's see what was happening with this area. According to the reports, in this area there was usually an anticyclone. What does this mean? Well, basically good weather. There was an anticyclone and it often stayed here for a long time. So it created an extraordinary climate that people enjoyed for many years in that area of Spain, in the northern part, in that part of the Atlantic. What other scientists and meteorologists believe. Also, what I mentioned earlier about whether the temperature is hotter or not is that the patterns in the area are changing. He says, the Azores High, that's what they called it, has been working perfectly for at least the last 2 or 3 decades. It causes the climate in that area to tend more toward good weather than bad weather. The thing is, and this is a study by Nature Geoscience, they revealed that the high pressure system that had formed in recent years, but they believe that area has had more high pressure systems than bad weather, so to speak, and that over the last 1,200 years there has been that kind of climate stability in the area, but this is changing as it weakens. The high-pressure system is creating a corridor linking directly to the ocean in the south of the peninsula, allowing storms to enter unobstructed. This is from the Gulf of Cadiz. From there, the accelerated warming of the Arctic has also weakened the jet stream, which is the engine that guides the storms, causing them to meander and generate. The bad weather that we're having now and that in recent years has also been significant in those areas. So, does that mean that we can basically expect the bad weather to continue? Because it seems that the pattern in that area is changing. At least that's what this study shows. The deformation of what they call the jet stream has created an air valley or trough which acts like a rain trap. In other words, the rain gets there and is kind of pulled in, so to speak. Previously, storms passed quickly, but now they linger for days over the same area, causing floods and problems. Besides this, in the same study, they also confirm what I was just talking about regarding the temperature issue. The report says the ocean surface is much hotter than usual. In 2025, there were record temperatures in the Atlantic, and 2026 brings yet another anomaly observed in the Atlantic. Atlantic temperatures are very warm, especially farther north. For the United States, this could mean hurricanes may travel farther north and become stronger. While strong hurricanes may have always been common here, they will keep occurring. Some could also reach New York. Picture a hurricane like those that strike Florida, Haiti, or Cuba. Here to Mexico, if one of those suddenly hits New York, that's really serious. Let's discuss other key topics too. How have you been? How are things going? Let's move on to other topics, other matters that draw attention. Let's talk about a really strange case which has been investigated. A person who goes against, let's say, much of the official research in the field of archaeology, but who has generated a lot of tension lately. Let's get into that detail. How have you been? Greetings to Luis, to Magico, Luna, Angelica. How have you been? Israel, how are you? Very good, Julio Benavides. What's up? Let's get into this detail, right? And right away, we'll leave the background image here with some of the symbols that have caught your attention in different parts of the world. I'm sure you'll notice these images you're seeing now. A researcher who has been analyzing different cultures around the world for some time now is certain that there must be another explanation for how and why. Many things have been built, many civilizations, based on certain ideas and very similar symbols. He has a theory that there was a primary civilization, so to speak, much earlier than the ones we know, right? Since it's the weekend, I'd like to tell you about this case. No, that doesn't mean it's been accepted. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's a theory that's not widely accepted and is highly questioned. But what he also says is that it's not just about questioning. He claims to have evidence to support what he's saying. Matthew Lacroix, an independent researcher, writer, and American lecturer specializing in ancient civilizations, claims that he has found more and more patterns, sacred symbolism, and megalithic architecture, which coincides not only in the ease of construction, because many argued that, well, they built in a pyramid shape because it was easier to build, but he says it goes beyond that. It's not just a matter of logic or construction. This clearly has a connection to something that must have existed. Primario, the author of books like Stage of Time and The Illusion of Us, where he proposes that human history is much older than what conventional archaeology accepts. For example, he claims that 38,000 to 40,000 years ago, there must have been an advanced pre-glacial civilization before the Great Cataclysm, let's say, before the Ice Age. So there was a civilization before that, right? Let's say quite a bit. I mean, no, he's not just saying that, but that there was a very evolved, very advanced civilization that was already building, that already had many advances in many areas. But then, apparently the massive climate effect that happened at the time, with the ice and all that, the civilization was severely damaged. And they started splitting up, and it was like there was a kind of regression for a while, until later that wisdom resurfaced. That information, started spreading to other parts of the world. He claims that there are geometric patterns, symbols, stepped and inverted pyramids, designs that appear in Egypt, in Turkey, in South America, in Asia, and that they are all completely connected to the same origin. He states that there must have been an advanced pre-glacial civilization before the Great Cataclysm about 38,000 to 40,000 years ago, meaning that it already existed at that age, so it would be even older. He claims that even at that time, they would have had to understand cosmic cycles, and that all that knowledge was left behind in codices on stone monuments for future generations. One of the main focuses of this research is in Egypt, especially at the Temple of the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau, where he interprets architectural elements ignored by official archaeology. And he says, that it all needs to be reconsidered. Regardless of whether all this sounds crazy, that's a separate issue. What I've talked about for many years, I've talked about off camera because, they're not going to tell you that on camera. But I've talked to people who are very involved in astronomy, who work in important areas in that field, or in archaeology, for example. And what they tell you is, that there's a very strong professional jealousy, in which anything that goes beyond what's already established and previously researched by others is hardly accepted. It's very hard to refute it because There's a strong jealousy, a big professional jealousy, so they don't accept it, they don't allow it. And for it to get through the bureaucracy of private or public universities or whatever, for it to get through to these scientific institutions, it's really complicated. They won't let you, it has to be something extremely, extremely obvious, so that there's no other way but this. Or that many times they go public and start showing evidence until at some point they start to be accepted. There's significant bureaucracy between these universities and scientists, and often one country accepts something while others don't, creating constant hassle. And that happens in medicine, it happens in the exact sciences, it happens everywhere, but in some sciences it happens more than in others. For example, specifically in physics, for instance, and in other areas. Sometimes it's a bit easier because they're exact sciences. So when a new discovery comes along, sometimes there's a bit more openness, but in other sciences that aren't so exact. Well, it starts to be more debatable whether one person is right or another. So they're not very open, The scientific community rejects these conclusions in response. Obviously, regarding this person, Matthew Lacroix, they say he's not a traditional academic. And well, this has made him into a figure who, yes, might be very well known, but is constantly getting into debates. And he insists that he's obviously not the first. That's why I mention it, because he's not the first to say it, and he won't be the last. How many people have talked about the famous OPARTs? For example, there's a museum dedicated to those things. Technologies, so to speak. Figures, technologies. I mean, very basic things like a hammer. Things like that they've found, but not from 40,000 or 50,000 years ago, but rather 150,000 years ago or something like that. They've found necklaces, they've found things, right? Things that were made in ancient times, but not just old super ancient. And you say, well, who made them? If supposedly at that time there was no way to make something like that, who made it, right? So if they're there, well, there are debates. That's where the debates have to happen. But yeah, it seems like progress on those topics is kind of slow, right? For now, I'm just leaving a comment and keeping track. If I notice anything important, we'll discuss it in detail. But there's a congressman named Eric Paulson. He's from Missouri, from the United States, right? And this congressman says that he already gave the order on behalf of Trump to go investigate bases like Area 51 and all those, to investigate and get everything possible out. He's desperate to bring out his chupacabra or something strange to distract the media and relieve pressure on himself. So, well, in the middle of all this, since these are scandals, maybe at least some interesting things will be revealed. Of course, they would have to be solid and have evidence, right? If not, then it doesn't make sense. But on the other hand, it's also about generating and attracting attention. The point is that the congressman from Missouri, Eric Paulson, who is part of the Congressional Oversight Committee that investigates unidentified anomalous phenomena known as WAFS or omnis or UFOs or whatever you want to call them. But this Republican legislator assures that the request has already been made to the president and that White House officials are looking to visit the military sites where supposedly there is recovered material, biological remains, and records and files of supposedly encounters with objects of this kind, right? The White House has reportedly already asked the Department of Defense, now called the Department of War, to conduct this internal investigation, according to the congressman. So, if what Paulson says is true, then even if it's done indirectly, they're going to want to bring these things out, or even directly, right? But apparently there's already a request in that regard, so we'll be keeping an eye out to see what comes up. Well, look, a report is being made by different human rights organizations, and in this case, even Amnesty International has already come out to report this. In North Korea, they are reportedly eliminating young people, minors, for having watched Squid Game, which is a show from South Korea. Amnesty International is the main source of this accusation. They say, well, they have reliable reports, let's say, that North Korea is eliminating these minors. For having watched the program, there has already been talk in the past about very severe punishments. For example, listening to BTS, Korean men and women listening to that kind of what they call K-pop, right? The non-governmental organization Amnesty International is reporting that the North Korean regime has executed citizens, even minors, for crimes. Enjoy watching South Korean series like Squid Game. In a report published this week, Amnesty International reported that if citizens are caught watching South Korean television shows, they risk public humiliation. They can spend years in labor camps. But in some cases, they are also executed. Very terrible situations. There's another topic they mention, which is about whether someone has money. There are also people who have their own resources, people who work for the regime or things like that. They have money. They pay bribes and get away with the problem. Nothing happens to them. But those who can't afford to pay bribes to different soldiers, military personnel, etc., well, they end up in jail, forced labor, and the situation is really tough. Well, another situation, also another interesting topic about what's happening in the world. A very curious situation has been reported in the Green River. They claim an anomaly, speaking of anomaly, an anomaly 200 kilometers deep, which has caught people's attention. A river that has been under investigation for years. And scientists have solved this geological mystery that has been a mystery for 150 years, as they report. For more than 150 years, geologists couldn't understand how the Green River crossed the Winter Mountains, a mountain range that formed long before the river took its current course. The mountains are around 50 million years old, and the Green River's course was set 8 million years ago. How was it possible for a younger river to have formed through such ancient mountains? From a geological perspective, for decades, different hypotheses were proposed, such as the idea that rivers older than the mountains have river captures or sediment accumulation, but none of them could explain this situation. Researchers from the University of Glasgow and Utah turned their attention to another topic. The depths of the Earth, the lithosphere, and the rhythmic layer that includes the crust and the upper mantle. According to what the study revealed, known as lithospheric dripping, where a dense mass beneath these crusts detaches and sinks, this sinking would have been caused precisely by that phenomenon. Well, at least that's what they've concluded now. The joining of the Green River with the Colorado River system altered the continental divide, affecting waters that flowed toward the Pacific and toward the Atlantic. It changed habitats and altered local wildlife evolution. So, it's a mystery. A mystery they say is half solved because this situation is still being investigated, another topic that also draws attention. There's a complaint being made about it. They claim that the requirements they're setting to work at SPACEX in Texas have been, well, let's say, not accepted by the people who could work there, engineers and people who could work, who pass all the tests, so to speak. They decide not to work for SPACEX. They prefer to go to other companies because basically what they're asked is to work at SPACEX and to practically live at SPACEX. The hours are too many and they don't give job opportunities to their partners, so suddenly they're forced to stay inside these, like small cities made up only of SPACEX workers. But the partner isn't allowed to work. I mean, they don't give them a job, so they have to leave there to work somewhere else. It's an issue that obviously people have complained about a lot. They say it's like they're running a kind of technological monastery. That's exactly how they both described it. He noted there's a separation between SPACEX employees and the general public, and they try to keep them as isolated as possible. I don't know if it's for security reasons or so their employees aren't poached, I don't know, but that's what people have been complaining about. Many people have just decided to stop working for that company. Starbase, which is located, for example, near the border with Mexico, about 40 minutes from Broadville. He has been, drawing attention to the fact that they placed them outside the cities, so that it's kind of complicated to have to leave. The headquarters, for example, of the Gigafactory they have in Austin is actually 30 minutes away from Austin, and it has also had to adapt to, families usually families live there with the workers and they usually don't have a life outside. Attention has focused on how these initiatives operate, claiming to integrate housing, education, and basic services. Everyone, basically within what is dominated or controlled by that company or those companies. Very interesting topic. Well, let's move on to other topics, also other important matters. Sioku's place. What we saw a little while ago is really striking. These clashes that have been happening over there, in Italy, right? The protests against the Olympic Games. There have already been several incidents, even disturbances. Thousands of people have been marching through the streets of Milan in protest over the environmental, social, and economic impact of the Winter Olympic Games in cities like Cortina d'Ampezzo. According to local media, the march was organized by the Committee of Unsustainable Olympics and Gathering. Around 5,000 protesters gathered. The day ended with tensions as serious incidents and disturbances were reported between the protesters and the security forces who clashed with each other. It was quite a scene. Powerful water jets, police with shields. You know how it goes, right? These kinds of situations and clashes have been happening quite a lot. Fireworks too, there was a bit of everything. The criticism is partly because too much artificial snow was used. This leads to a lot of water usage and management. The deforestation and urban changes that were carried out to make the Olympics possible, and a series of issues and situations that they didn't agree with. That's how things are. On this matter, let's go to the comments. How have you been? How has your weekend been? This is our second broadcast, so we're just updating things as they go. I was really surprised by what the National Security Agency reported, but at the same time, they keep everything in the dark. So, it's hard to determine first which country is having secret calls with someone from Trump's inner circle. Is that person still working there or not? What were their intentions? We don't know. There are many serious things there, he says. Tino says, once my dog caught a hare, it never rained so much that it didn't let up. How have you been, Tino? A big greeting to Julio Benavides, to Peru, and to everyone watching from Spain, Peru, the United States, Mexico City, and Monterrey. Thank you for your information. As for the historical ruins, there are many stone ruins, and they have common symbols or similar burial practices. For example, mummifications, says Karim. How have you been, Karim? Greetings, he says. More oppression than what North Korea usually has, says Patrick. They're really, really intense. Greetings, Betty Dreyfus. How have you been? A big hello, Miguel. How's it going, Israel? And to the whole community, thank you very much. We'll see each other again later. We'll keep talking if there's something important to discuss. If not, then I'll see you tonight. It all depends on the information. Hugs. See you. Goodbye.